My internet does blur up, and maybe you can just ask me.
My mom taught me to sell at a spaza shop. She ran a hair salon. I pretty much learned entrepreneurship from my mom's.
Umntu ngumntu ngabantu. That on your own, you can't really do it. You need the support of those around you.
You will have a network of people, a network of communities, and a society that will make sure that you count.
Thursday evening and another issue of Straight Talk coming to you from Cape Town. As always, we endeavor to talk about the issues that are so relevant to the informal sector. There's a buzzword going around at the moment, and that's elections and election results. And we started our conversation on Tuesday evening. But tonight we actually have all the votes counted. And that has some serious implications for us in the informal sector. I always promise you that we bring to the panel specialists in the area, and tonight we have political analysts that are going to tell us more about what they see in the results, and particularly what we as informal sector could expect and what we should be asking for. So welcome to my panelists this evening. Candace Bailey, welcome.
Good evening, Louise. Thank you so much for having me.
Candace, just give me a 30-second background of who you are.
Perfect. So I'm a final year PhD student. I've just submitted my PhD. I'm at Wits University. I'm from Cape Town, but I've been living in Joburg for about 13 years. So I straddle the two cities. But yeah,
oh, wonderful. Then we've also got Vinothan Naidu. Good evening and welcome.
Hi, good evening, Louise. Good to be with you.
And a little bit of yourself as well, please, Vinothan.
So I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Political Studies at UCT. My background is in public administration and public policy. And some of my research, I suppose on the more applied end, includes local government analysis, as well as national and provincial government analysis.
So at 6 o'clock this evening, and it's literally hot off the press, at 6 o'clock, the IEC gathered at their command center in Gauteng, and they have just made the official results available, which means that all votes have been counted. And wow, what an interesting set of results we see. Candace, give us your take on just what we're seeing. We see that the ANC has got a 46% support, the DA 21.8%, and the IFP with 5.7%, the EFF at 10.4%. But we also see some new guys making some inroads. Like Action SA with 2.3%, the Patriotic Alliance surprisingly also coming in at almost 1%, and then we see the Independents at 7.7%, which means that there's a lot of us that are talking quite a different language to what we are historically used to.
Indeed, Louise. I think one of the biggest things is that this is a historic vote, an historic election for South Africa, purely because the ANC has now dropped below that 50% voter support base. And I mean, that it's something that's been on the cards for quite a while, but the fact that it's actually happened now is really a historic moment for the ANC. And we would have seen, if you had followed some of the political analysis that's been happening today, it's really the ANC coming out and saying, they need to up their game. But I think the message that is clear is that people are saying the one-party dominant state is over and it's time for coalitions. Coalitions are going to be the order of the day, and it's really how things are going to change up. Both the ANC and the DA, obviously the ANC has lost a lot more than the DA, but the DA has also seen a bit of a drop. The EFF has seen a slight increase in the number of councils that they've managed to attain. also some changes in, for example, the Freedom Front Plus, a slight increase in that on that front. But I think that the overall message is that one-party dominant state is over. We are going to see coalitions, and things are going to change, and the way things are done are going to have to change, particularly at the local government level, if we want to see, if the ANC and potentially the DA want to see things, going back to where they came from, they're going to have to change the way they do things.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, because this is almost a reset button, like COVID-19 has been for the world, isn't it, Vinodhan? Because Candice has now said one party, people have voted one way, but what's particularly evident is the amount of people who haven't cast their vote. So have they told us more with their silence and literally staying away from the ballot boxes?
I think that they have, and I think beyond the results, which it's a psychological threshold that we've dipped under, the idea that the ANC could not garner more than 50% of the vote. I think that's absolutely important, but seeing the large number of the electorate just not bothering to turn out, and even setting aside things like COVID and the weather, it was a Monday, long weekend. I don't think those were significant factors. I think it's a telling signal to the political establishment that there's such a high level of disaffection about what government can deliver, and I think in voters' minds there's a strong belief that for voters to come out and vote, they expect a tangible level of commitment from political parties to deliver, and I think it was strongly evident in the urban turnout as well as the results, and I think it's dangerous. I think because it raises questions about legitimacy. There isn't necessarily a threshold to say that below which it's an illegitimate election, because the question is, well, what do we do? Do we rerun it? It's not practical. But setting that aside, it's just for such a large segment of the electorate to simply not turn out, I think is the bigger story here, compared to what the implications have been for the big parties, particularly the ANC.
So Candice, the fact that the electorate didn't come and vote, the majority, does that say that they are so disillusioned with the party that they've selected before, but out of loyalty, they're not prepared to give their vote to anybody else? So does that mean that there is still a chance for some of the bigger parties to redeem themselves, as we look towards our national elections coming up in a few years?
I think two things, and this argument was presented by Stephen Friedman also today, that the voter turnout and the lack of voter turnout really talks to the fact that people didn't want to vote for any other party. They were not happy to vote for the ANC, but they didn't want to vote for example, the DA or one of the smaller parties, and that's why they were so undecided about their vote that they just stayed away. So I think you're absolutely right in that, and I think that is a common sentiment that has come up. Sorry, I missed the second part of your question was?
No, that was it.
Yeah. Oh, I think it shows that there is complete voter apathy, and that they are not happy. Oh, you were asking me about whether they can redeem themselves. I don't think that the ANC will be able to get back to where it ever was. I think that the way things stand, South Africans have a lot of unhappiness with the ruling party and the way things, and this is anecdotally, how many times have you met a friend who is unhappy about service delivery, who's unhappy about corruption, who's unhappy about something that's affecting them on a daily basis that the ruling party doesn't seem to just, take cognizance of. So I think that the ANC can't get there, but I think they do have a chance to pull up. They still have a chance to pull up their socks and to get some of those voters back, some of them, purely because the margin by which they are leading is still quite significant. So, and if you look at in terms of the coalition parties, and you look at the way coalitions are potentially going to be formed and who's going to be the kingmaker. I mean, there's a lot of talk now about who's going to play that kingmaker role. In Johannesburg, is it going to be Action SA? But we also know that the DA and the EFF are not sitting at the same table. They don't want to sit at the same table. So, how is that going to affect the coalitions, and who's going to be able to, how are they going to be able to negotiate going forward? It's quite a complicated and a tricky situation that we're going to find ourselves in for the next bit. But I think that the ANC could, if it had the temerity, it could at least get some people's votes back. But they could never get to where they were before.
So Vinod, when we talk local government, that really is where coalitions are going to affect, especially the informal trader. That is dependent on how local government manage and implement government standards to the informal market. I want you to start off by just explaining to me, what exactly does coalition mean, and why is this such a buzzword?
There's been an intensification. I suppose this year's results sort of intensifies a discussion that began after 2016, particularly with the metros and the sort of changing power through coalitions. I think the unique aspect of local government in South Africa compared to national and provincial is that, unlike national and provincial, where we've got a fully proportional representation system, so basically, seats in a provincial legislature and the national parliament will be allocated on the basis of what proportion of the votes a party gets. The unique aspect of local government is we've got a mixed member PR system. So you have a mixture of true constituencies or wards coupled with proportional representation. And what that does is it allows local residents, wherever they are, to really get a good look at individual candidates who want to represent them in their area and who they're voting for to speak on their behalf and to deliver in concrete terms rather than sitting far off in parliament or provincial legislature. And I think because of that, I think that's one of the factors that's produced these sort of coalitional agreements or produce the circumstances which is now forcing parties to work together when they wouldn't necessarily do so at a national and provincial level. And what I read from that is that voters want parties, particularly in urban local government, to pragmatically come together. And one of the odd things that I've sort of taken from how political parties are talking about coalitions, they talk about them in terms of negotiation. I don't want to negotiate with this one. I will only negotiate with this one. These are the terms. And there's a level of arrogance associated with that because the electorate has said, we want you guys to work together. The results are a reflection of what we've decided. So, to hear a leader of a party say, well, I won't work with this party or another, it's completely the opposite of what I interpret as the message being sent, particularly in the metros, that we can't afford these ideological principled positions around who's going to work with whom and who's not. There's got to be a level of pragmatism here. Which I think is reflected in the urban results, in the metro results. And I think that is where, the negotiation ought to happen on policy matters rather than the horse trading, who gets this position, that position. And I think, for informal traders, again, you mentioned it's a key constituency, in our metropolitan urban governments that's been neglected for too long. I think there's an opportunity here to pragmatically come together. And I think there's an opening for the alliance and those who are advocating for greater benefits, privileges, rights, access, opportunities for urban traders. There's an opportunity here for the alliance to engage with, hopefully, what will be a more pragmatic type of local politics that comes of this.
Look, we definitely as Saita are endeavoring to make sure that we open up all those channels to be able to sit around the table and really be what we proclaim to be, and that is the voice of the informal sector. Candace, help me understand, what is kingmaker status? How does this work, and what suddenly makes one party, gives them such a lever to claim themselves as being kingmakers?
I think, in simple terms, I mean, without getting into the technical definitions, essentially, it's the person who's going to help one of the parties who are in a who are slightly closer to the majority, actually get that majority within the municipality. And that means that they will then be able to make the decisions. They'll be able to take the key roles within that municipality. And that's really the crux of it, is is the EFF going to be the kingmaker, in the sense that, are they going to be able to they'll be able to determine who the majority will be in that specific municipality. And I can't agree with Vinothan more in terms of him talking about, that arrogance that's come out. I'm completely with you on that one. I think political parties have almost forgotten that they're there to represent people. They're there to represent us. And even if it's only 12 million people that have voted, they're there to represent us and take our needs and our interests forward. And that doesn't often happen. Like you're saying, that the horse trading is going to happen, and it's going to be who's getting what position and how are they going to capitalize on it. And that's really the sad bit of our democracy at the moment.
So, Vinothan, a particularly interesting metro is KwaZulu-Natal, and then Johannesburg and Tshwane, where we've seen the DA and the ANC lost considerable amounts of votes in the Gauteng area to Action SA. And you've got the leader of Action SA, like you said earlier, coming and saying, we might consider speaking to other parties, but we're definitely not interested in speaking to the ruling party. So what does that mean if they don't want to be in a coalition with the ruling party? Does that give us a sense of, especially if we think about where Mr. Mashaba comes from in terms of building himself from informal status to leading a new party in South Africa that has really shaken up things quite considerably? Does that mean that Mr. Mashaba is drawing the line in the sand and saying, by virtue of the fact that I don't want to speak to you, based on what you've done in the last couple of years, I would rather than align myself with other people to show you how it's done? Is that what we must read into it?
I mean, it seems, just from having interpreted some of the sound bites and interviews that I've seen with Mr. Mashaba, it seems that there's maybe animus is too strong a word, but certainly there's a strong resistance to working with the ANC for whatever reason. But he did also say that, look, and I don't think this is specific to Action SA. I think other parties are being a little bit careful and playing their cards very close to their chest by saying, look, we're going to, we will entertain a coalitional discussion or negotiation based on, what sort of the party bosses have to say about it. I think parties are very reluctant to say how they will enter into a negotiation around a coalition or working together, whatever pact they decide to form, such that it doesn't abandon any commitments or aspects of their policy or ideological agenda, which might mean that their voters might be turned off by it. I think, parties, and I think it's a particular way of thinking about. It's a particular way of seeing how parties themselves see coalitions. I think one can see coalitions in different ways. So in many other countries, a coalition is a much more pragmatic reality of politics, where there's an expectation that the electorate wants politicians to work together, again, in more pragmatic ways, much less ideological, much less based on sort of hyper-partisanship. And I think the problem that we have is that, that coalitions, it's really only kind of happening at local government level since the last election. We're still kind of new at it. It hasn't gone all that well. If we think about the results in the Metro, Nelson Mandela Bay, Joburg, and Tshwane. And it seems to be that we've got a very sort of party-centric brand of politics where, it's about the party brand, the party agenda. And so that's what's being protected. So parties are very protective of their brands and are sort of unwilling to give too much away, such that they might lose support if they enter into a coalition and commit to certain things which their partisans, their loyalists would punish them for. And that's one way of thinking about a coalition, but it's not necessarily the way that I think about it, which is a far more pragmatic way of simply coming together and solving concrete policy issues in the local government space, where you can sort of put ideology to side. And I think, as Candice was saying, this idea of kingmakers. Your parties shouldn't see themselves as kingmakers simply to get another party over the 50% threshold so that you don't have deadlock in council. It should be more about, look, who can we work with on concrete policy issues that we can move ahead and get some results on the ground. And I think that's a more pragmatic way of thinking about the kingmaker status.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Because you are a specialist on local government in particular, Vinothan, let's take it back to an informal trader that has really had the hardest time so far. And the people leading in my ward or in my municipality at the moment might not be the people that I have voted for, or because I've refrained from voting, the guard has changed. How does that leave me in terms of, I still need to build this economy? So what are the things that practically informal traders can do to hold local government accountable, even if it isn't the people that I voted for?
Well, you look, there's a whole policy framework around local economic development, which has been around for a long time in South African municipalities, and I think it's within that context that informal traders need to and should be able to advocate for greater opportunities, particularly around formalizing trading spaces, and creating a tangible space for traders to operate in a sort of retail environment which is dominated by sort of bricks and mortar sellers. I did some recent work in just looking at the roles of ward councillors in some of Cape Town's sort of a mixed sample of Cape Town's wards, and in one of the wards, it was distinctly evident to me that one of the challenges that the councillor had was trying to reconcile, on the one hand, the need to create spaces in the ward area for informal traders to operate, whilst at the other end of the spectrum, you've got more formalized businesses and neighborhoods associations who would prefer to police informal traders, where they're a nuisance rather than income earners. And so how do you reconcile those two things? And sometimes the city doesn't help because of the permits, the bureaucracy that is thrown at informal traders simply to operate legally. And so you've got this clash between a culture which attempts to police and criminalize informal trading on the one hand, and on the other hand, a framework around local economic development that's existed for many years, which ought to be much more accommodating of local traders as part of the sort of local economic landscape. And I can tell you that that is one of the things where I see a great deal of tension. Certainly, I've seen it here in Cape Town in some of my own work. and I'm pretty certain that that's a tension that is going to be evident in many of the big metros. And I think we ought to be able to solve that practically, because if parties aren't willing to resolve that debate on the side of local traders, then really what value is there in advocating for local economic development if you're missing a key constituency from it?
Yeah, Candice, I see you burning to add.
I'm burning to come in. I'm burning to add. It's interesting because I found this really cool report done by the Dullah Omar Institute, where they had actually been looking at the 2021 local government election, and they'd been looking at the manifestos and what different parties were promising. And they had looked at informal traders and the informal sector and what the different parties had promised. And it's exactly to Vinodhan's point in terms of, both the DA and the ANC were saying that they're going to cut out red tape. They were going to cut out the bureaucracy that exists in at local government level, where traders are obviously always falling victim to. And the EFF on the other side were being very, very specific in saying they're going to stop informal traders, for example, from having their goods taken away. Now, that's been a very contentious issue in Johannesburg. It's been a big issue in Johannesburg. And that's been in the ANC-run city of Joburg. So while the ANC, on the one hand, on the political end, they're really advocating for economic development and they're advocating for LED, they also at the same time are penalizing traders, which is not the way they should be done. I mean, you're basically contradicting yourself. So there is a little bit of space that they need to clean up. So in terms of holding voters or holding the party to account, whether it's your party or not, I think that they've made promises and they've said what they're going to do and how they want to accommodate the informal sector. So we need to be able to have these conversations a lot more. And accountability is only effective if you ask questions.
So if you had to have the major political players in front of you right now, Candice, and you had to give them a word of advice specific to the informal sector, what would you say to them? I think the rain has just caught Candice there. Vinodhan, would you care to go with the answer in the meantime until we get Candice back?
I think that there ought to be a reframing of the role that informal traders play in our local economies. The tension and the contradiction between policing, demonizing, criminalizing informal trading versus the opportunity to embrace it via existing local economic development policies, that tension has to be put aside in favor of the advancement and accommodation of informal traders. I think that part of the problem in many of our cities is just sort of the historical fragmentation, racialization, inequities spatially. Which makes informal trading in many areas very inhospitable. I suppose in many areas of our metros, it's a very inhospitable environment for informal traders. And so, the easy thing for cities to do is, well, you simply sort of balkanize the sector. You say, well, we're going to create spaces for you here, here, and here, which might not necessarily be ideal in terms of a trading environment. I think the bigger challenges, and it's not just for informal traders, but it's also for housing. How do you break down those spatially entrenched inequities such that you're not just solving the problem by building houses where you can, but might not necessarily be the most convenient in terms of access to schools, access to transport arteries, because you're still sort of, the apartheid city still kind of remains. And I think it's the same for informal traders, that there has to be a way of simply reframing and I think parties reevaluating their views of informal traders such that they become, this constituency becomes a mainstream constituency in a city, not a constituency that needs to be sort of marginalized to the fringes wherever they can be accommodated. But I mean, I think that's part of the bigger discussion, because I think it also relates to housing as well. You know, how unfortunately affordable housing is not built in the areas that are most accessible to economic opportunities. Although the policy speaks to that, it's not done to the extent that it should.
Yeah, and I think in the Western Cape we know what that is all about. Candice, did you hear my question earlier? Because you just went on a strike a pose moment, and
apologies. Apologies, it was the economic hub of South Africa. Wonderful connection in the economic hub of South Africa, as you can see. Service delivery. I think you were asking me what was the advice, and I think that is what Vinothan was asking. What is your advice to the big players? And
yes,
I think very similar to what Vinothan is saying is that the political arm needs to speak to the administrative arm so that your policies are implementable. And that you are not saying one thing and doing another, because I think that's what informal traders have been stuck with. They've been the word is potentially victimized, but also just sidelined by politicians saying one thing and trying to get those votes, but at the same time, on the other side, really not allowing the administration to implement it in the proper way. And I think, I mean, the other issue is also policies that need to affect women, because women are there are a lot of women informal traders. Are they accommodating women in these policies? Are they thinking about women as I want to call them the breadwinners of the informal sector, but how are they accommodating them and making sure that they are, considered? So those are the two things that I would say they really should think about.
Yeah, you both raised very interesting points. In addition to just the economics of the informal sector, Vinothan, you spoke about housing, you speaking about women, but something else that comes out of there also is specific to families, and that's early childcare development. I mean, we know that the majority of women that have been informal traders for years have literally raised their babies on the market in banana boxes, and then the schooling system fails them afterwards because those kids weren't stimulated enough before they got into the schooling system. And then mom needs to leave at 4 o'clock in the morning, and they need to get themselves to school, and then they don't get to school for whatever reason. So that's why I'm thankful that what you guys are saying really is elevating the message that Saita wants to bring across. And we claim it when we say nothing about us without us. And what you've both have said tonight is very, very encouraging, because it again says that in order for local government to be effective, and whether it's between administration and legislation, it's about making sure that your table around which you sit is representative of all the people that are being affected by what you are deciding, isn't it?
True, completely.
So yeah, I'm really, really thankful. I don't want to delve in too deep, because I want to in a few weeks invite, once the dust is settled and once all the coalitions agreements have been made, my intention is to call those political parties in those municipal areas back onto the show, and maybe you'll grace us with your presence again so that we can unpack the legislative issues together with the practical implementation, because we see that often that is where it gets lost in translation. And how can we make sure that everybody reads the legislation and implements it in the manner it was supposed to be? So, Candice, we've come to the end of our session. Do you have some final words for us?
I think that this is a really good initiative. My studies focuses all on accountability, so I think that it's a really great way to have a conversation and to get these conversations started and to have them. We need to engender accountability among people and to help them understand their role in accountability. And often they don't understand that they have a voice and that they need to raise their voices. So I want to applaud Saita for having this discussion, this platform, and having this space to get people. To get them the information that they need to be able to make the decisions that they can and have the voices, the strong voices that we need in society. And yeah, I would just say keep going. And let's invite Herman Mashaba, yeah. I'm keen to see what he's about to say.
Yeah, I'm do that. Vinodhan, some closing remarks from you.
Yeah, just to echo Candace's point about the importance of the work that the Alliance is doing. The informal traders are that constituency within a metro local government in particular that's probably the most easiest to forget if you're a political leader, because I think a lot of political leaders might not see much currency in spending too much time talking about traders that are operating in an informal space, trying to earn income when there are bigger fish to fry. There are always bigger fish to fry at the local government level. More established businesses, more formalized modes of entrepreneurship, and of course, water, sanitation, housing. I think without an organization like yours, it's very easy for the rights and the opportunities that could be provided to informal traders to simply evaporate, because you're dealing with a disparate constituency of individuals who are trying to utilize the urban space to earn an income, employ people, raise their families, and yet they're amongst the most marginalized within the city. And I think it takes an organization like yours to really advocate on their behalf. So just keep doing what you're doing.
With those words, thank you very, very much for joining us this evening. Like you say, Candace, it's all about accountability, and Saita will definitely be going out and advocate for the accountability, not only from the leadership in the municipalities, but also from us as informal traders to start saying, but this is what we are entitled to. And we want to be part of that discussion. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Saita. Straight Talk. My name is Louise. Tuesday next week at 7 o'clock right here on the Saita Media Facebook channel. We'll see you again. Till then, bye-bye.